Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Homecoming. The weight of the surprise lifted from Nolan Barrett's shoulders as he pulled into the driveway of his suburban Chicago home. After 6 weeks overseeing construction projects across Europe, he'd managed to finish early. He hadn't told Melissa he was coming home. Their 15th anniversary was tomorrow, and he wanted to surprise her. The December chill bit through his suit as he retrieved his luggage from the trunk. Their 2-story colonial stood quiet against the afternoon sky, unusual for a Thursday. Normally, Melissa would be at her interior design studio until 6, and their daughter Lila at volleyball practice. Nolan smiled, fishing out his house key. The quiet would give him time to prepare. He'd picked up Melissa's favorite chocolates in Belgium and a small music box from Prague. The anniversary plans could still work even with his early arrival. The house was oddly silent as he stepped inside. No television, no music, just the quiet hum of the heater. Nolan frowned, setting his bags down in the foyer. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing through the first floor. Nothing. He checked his watch, 2:15 p.m. Lila should be in school, but Melissa typically worked from home on Thursdays. Her car was in the garage. As he moved toward the kitchen, soft whispers floated down from upstairs. Nolan froze, hand instinctively tightening around his keys. A man's voice, barely audible, followed by Melissa's unmistakable laugh. The whispers faded into silence. Blood rushed to Nolan's face as reality crashed against him. He was about to head upstairs when movement caught his eye. Lila appeared at the top of the staircase, her eyes widening in surprise. "Daddy," the 13-year-old gasped, clutching her phone to her chest. "You shouldn't be here." Nolan forced a smile. "I finished early. Wanted to surprise your mom." "Why aren't you at school?" Lila descended the stairs slowly, her face pale. "I had a half day. Teacher conferences." Something in her expression didn't match her words. She reached the bottom step and glanced nervously toward the upper floor. "Daddy," she whispered, "Mommy said you're never coming back." The words hit Nolan like a physical blow. "What are you talking about? I was only gone for work." Lila's eyes welled with tears. "She told Uncle Porter you were leaving us for good." Uncle Porter, Melissa's cousin, who'd been visiting more frequently over the past year. The cousin who'd comforted Melissa through her father's death last summer. The cousin whose whispers Nolan now recognized. Without another word, Nolan moved past Lila and took the stairs 2 at a time. The master bedroom door was closed. He pushed it open without hesitation. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. Melissa scrambled to cover herself with the sheets while Porter Dawson leapt from the bed, frantically grabbing for his discarded clothes. "Nolan!" Melissa gasped. "This isn't." "Don't." Nolan cut her off, his voice eerily calm. The rage building inside him was cold, calculating. He turned to Porter, who was struggling to pull on his pants. "You have 30 seconds to get out of my house." Porter stammered. "Listen, man, we need to talk about." 25 seconds. Something in Nolan's eyes must have conveyed the fury beneath his controlled exterior. Porter grabbed his shirt and shoes and hurried past him, not bothering to finish dressing. Melissa clutched the sheets tighter. "Nolan, please, let me explain. It's not what you think." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. This woman, with whom he'd built a life, born a child, created a home, was suddenly foreign to him. His eyes drifted to the nightstand where her phone lay, screen still illuminated. A text message preview caught his attention. "Divorce papers ready. Sign tomorrow. And won't contest with the evidence we have." Evidence? Nolan's mind raced. What evidence? And tomorrow, their anniversary. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. The whispered conversations he'd overheard on phone calls. The business trips Melissa had taken with Porter to scout locations for her design clients. The unexplained withdrawals from their joint account. This wasn't just an affair. This was a coup. "How long?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Nolan, we need to talk when you're calmer." "This isn't." "How long?" Melissa's shoulders slumped. "A year. But it's complicated. A year. A third of their daughter's life." Nearly 15,000 hours of lies. The sound of a door slamming downstairs broke the moment. Porter leaving, or Lila, escaping the implosion of her family. Nolan took a deep breath. Get dressed. We're going to have a conversation, and you're going to tell me exactly what you and Porter have been planning. As Melissa scrambled for her clothes, Nolan pulled out his phone and did something he'd never imagined doing. He called the police. I need to report a breaking and entering, he stated calmly when the dispatcher answered. And I have reason to believe the intruder and my wife were conspiring to harm me. Chapter 2. Unraveling. The police arrived within minutes. Officer Deandra Washington took Nolan's statement in the living room while her partner interviewed Melissa in the kitchen. Lila had disappeared to a neighbor's house. Nolan had texted their trusted family friend, Beverly Thomason, to look after her until things settled. So you're saying you believe your wife and this man were conspiring against you? Officer Washington clarified, her pen poised above her notepad. Nolan nodded. I saw a text message about divorce papers and evidence. Given the circumstances and my daughter's comment that I was never coming back, I have reason to believe there might be something more sinister at play. Washington's expression remained professional, but her eyes reflected sympathy. Mr. Barrett, finding your spouse in a compromising position is traumatic. Sometimes we jump to worst-case scenarios. I understand how it sounds, Nolan replied. But I'd like you to check if there have been any unusual financial transactions or insurance policies taken out in my name recently. The officer studied him for a moment before nodding. We'll look into it. From the kitchen, Melissa's voice rose in protest. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly believe he just happened to come home early today. He's setting me up. Nolan almost laughed at the absurdity. He pulled out his phone and showed Officer Washington his email exchanges with his project manager and flight information. My return wasn't planned until next week. I finished early and wanted to surprise my wife for our anniversary. The officer reviewed the emails and nodded. These appear legitimate. What followed was a 4-hour process of statements, questions, and arrangements. Nolan requested and received an emergency protective order based on his concerns. The officers advised Melissa to gather essentials and stay elsewhere while the situation was investigated. This is my house, too. Melissa protested as she packed a suitcase under Officer Washington's watchful eye. The house is solely in my name, Nolan responded quietly. My grandfather left it to me before we were married. It was a detail Melissa had always resented. Nolan's unwillingness to add her to the deed despite her numerous renovations to the historic property. Now, he was grateful for his grandfather's foresight. After Melissa left, escorted by the second officer, Washington handed Nolan her card. We'll look into the financial angles you mentioned, she said. In the meantime, document everything. Change your passwords. And consider speaking with an attorney first thing tomorrow. When Nolan was finally alone, the full weight of the day crashed down on him. He sank onto the sofa, hands trembling for the first time. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt contaminated. His phone buzzed with a text from Beverly. Lila's okay. She's asleep now. Call me when you can. He dialed immediately. Nolan, Beverly answered, her voice gentle. How are you holding up? I've been better, he admitted. How's Lila? Beverly hesitated. She's confused. Scared. She told me some things you should know. I'm listening. She overheard Melissa and Porter talking last week. Something about insurance money and making it look like an accident during your trip. Nolan, she was afraid to tell you because Melissa convinced her it was just a joke. Ice formed in Nolan's veins. Did she mention this to the police? No. She only told me after they left. She's terrified. Keep her there tonight, Nolan said. I need to handle something. After hanging up, Nolan went to his home office and unlocked the hidden safe behind his collection of architecture books. Inside was an old leather journal that had belonged to his father, a federal prosecutor who'd made enemies of dangerous people before his mysterious death 20 years ago. Nolan had never followed his father's path into law enforcement, choosing construction and development instead, but he'd inherited Lawrence Barrett's meticulous mind and contingency planning. He opened the journal to a page marked insurance and began to read his father's advice on handling betrayal. By midnight, he had planned. The next morning, Nolan met with Vivian Rosario, a formidable divorce attorney whose reputation for ruthlessness was well-earned. This isn't just about ending a marriage, Nolan explained after recounting the previous day's events. I believe my wife and her lover were plotting something more dangerous. Vivian's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Barrett, which is why I need your help to uncover what they were planning while protecting myself and my daughter. Vivian's expression hardened. Let's say I believe you. What do you want the outcome to be? Nolan considered the question carefully. Justice, protection for my daughter, and to ensure they never benefit from what they were planning. Very well, Vivian nodded, sliding a contract across her desk. Let's begin. Chapter 3, Buried Truths. 3 days after discovering Melissa's betrayal, Nolan sat across from Detective Tomas Reeves in a Spartan interview room at the Chicago PD. The preliminary investigation into Nolan's claims had uncovered disturbing evidence. We found several concerning items, Detective Reeves explained, opening a folder. First, a life insurance policy for $5 million taken out on you 6 months ago, with your wife as the sole beneficiary. The paperwork has your signature, but it's forged, Nolan finished. I never signed anything like that. Reeves nodded. Our document examiner agrees. Second, we found communications between your wife and Mr. Dawson discussing what appears to be a plan to sabotage your car before your drive to the airport for your recent business trip. Nolan's throat tightened. They were going to kill me. It appears that way. The messages are coded, but when combined with the life insurance policy and statements from your daughter about overheard conversations, we have enough to bring them in for questioning. Have they been arrested? Not yet. We're building the case carefully. Your wife has hired Winston Caldwell as her attorney. Nolan recognized the name, one of Chicago's most expensive criminal defense lawyers. How is she affording him? That's another interesting discovery. Reeves slid another document across the table. Your wife has been transferring funds from your joint accounts to a private account for over a year. Nearly $300,000. The betrayal deepened with each revelation. Nolan had trusted Melissa completely with their finances, focusing on his growing construction business while she handled their personal accounts. There's more, Reeves continued. Mr. Dawson isn't actually your wife's cousin. Nolan looked up sharply. What? Porter Dawson is actually Peter Donovan. He changed his name 7 years ago after serving time for fraud in Arizona. We believe he and Melissa met long before she introduced him as her cousin last year. The detective slid a photo across the table. A much younger Melissa with her arm around a man Nolan recognized as Porter, but with different hair and no beard. This was taken 12 years ago at a bar in Phoenix. Before you met her. Nolan stared at the image, memories reshuffling in his mind. Melissa had claimed to be from Seattle when they met. She'd said her family was all dead except for a few distant relatives. Porter had appeared last year, introduced as a cousin she'd reconnected with after her father's funeral. It had all been lies. We've been married for 14 years, Nolan said quietly. Was any of it real? Detective Reeves didn't answer. He didn't need to. After leaving the police station, Nolan drove to Beverly's house to see Lila. His daughter had been staying there since the confrontation, too upset to return home or see her mother, who'd been trying desperately to contact her. When Lila saw him, she ran into his arms. At 13, she was usually too cool for such displays, but trauma had stripped away the teenage facade. Did Mom really want to hurt you? She asked, her face pressed against his chest. Nolan stroked her hair. There's a lot happening that you don't need to worry about right now. I'm safe, and you're safe. That's what matters. Later, after Lila had gone to watch TV with Beverly's daughter, Beverly handed Nolan a cup of coffee and sat beside him at her kitchen island. There's something else you should know, she said hesitantly. Something Lila told me that she was afraid to tell the police. Nolan braced himself. What is it? Melissa has been taking her to visit a woman named Audrey in Milwaukee every few months. She told Lila it was her great aunt, but made her promise never to mention these visits to you. I've never heard of any Audrey, Nolan frowned. Lila said the last time they visited, about a month ago, she overheard Melissa and Audrey arguing about the plan and whether you deserved what was coming. Audrey apparently said something like, "Just because Lawrence ruined everything doesn't mean his son should pay." Nolan froze. "She mentioned my father? By name?" Beverly nodded. "Lila thought it was strange too, since she knew your dad died before you met Melissa." Nolan's mind raced. His father, Lawrence Barrett, had been investigating a major financial conspiracy before his accident. The case had officially remained unsolved, though Lawrence's colleagues had their suspicions about who was responsible. "I need Audrey's last name and address." Lila didn't know her last name, but she remembered the building. It was called Lakeside Towers on Milwaukee's waterfront. That night, after ensuring Lila was settled at Beverly's for another few days, Nolan returned home and went straight to his father's journal. He flipped through pages of notes until he found what he was looking for, a list of suspects from Lawrence's final case. Halfway down the page, Audrey Whitlock, financial consultant, possible money launderer for Donovan operation. Donovan, the same last name as Porter's original identity. The connections were becoming clear, forming a picture more disturbing than Nolan could have imagined. This wasn't just about Melissa's affair or a scheme to collect insurance money. This was about revenge against his father, extended to his son. Nolan closed the journal and reached for his phone. He had calls to make, plans to set in motion. The betrayal he'd uncovered went deeper than his marriage. It stretched back decades, rooted in his father's unfinished work. For the first time since discovering Melissa's infidelity, Nolan felt something beyond shock and pain. He felt purpose, determination. Melissa, Porter, and whoever else was involved wouldn't just face justice through the system. They would face him. And unlike his father, Nolan wouldn't be caught unprepared. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he needed. Caleb Weston, his former college roommate who now worked for a private security firm after years with military intelligence. "Caleb," he said when his friend answered, "I need your help." Chapter 4, Shadows of the Past. Caleb Weston arrived at Nolan's house just after midnight, carrying a nondescript duffel bag and the same intense, focused Nolan remembered from their college days. Now in his early 40s like Nolan, Caleb's military background showed in his precise movements and observant eyes that missed nothing. "Your place might be bugged," were his first words after Nolan let him in. "Let's talk outside." They settled on the back patio, where the January cold kept their conversation private beneath the hum of patio heaters. "Start from the beginning," Caleb instructed, setting up a small electronic device that emitted a low-frequency pulse, a counter-surveillance measure. Nolan recounted everything, discovering Melissa with Porter, the insurance policy, the connection to his father's old case, and Audrey Whitlock in Milwaukee. Caleb listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer. When Nolan finished, he leaned forward. "Your father was investigating the Donovan family when he died," Caleb stated. "They controlled one of the largest financial fraud operations in the Midwest in the early 2000s. Victor Donovan was the patriarch, but after he went to prison, his brother Richard took over. They specialized in long cons." "Long cons?" Nolan asked. "Schemes that take years to execute. Infiltrating targets' lives, gaining trust, then striking when everything's in place." Caleb's eyes met Nolan's, like marrying someone for their inheritance or position. The implication hit Nolan like a physical blow. "You think Melissa was placed in my life? We met by chance at a charity event." "Was it chance?" Caleb challenged. "Or did she know exactly where you'd be, what you liked, how to approach you?" Nolan thought back to that night 14 years ago. Melissa had bumped into him at the bar, spilling her drink. She'd been apologetic, charming. They discovered shared interests in architecture and design. It had seemed so natural. "I need to know for sure," Nolan said finally. "Then we investigate," Caleb replied, starting with Audrey Whitlock. 2 days later, they arrived in Milwaukee. Caleb had arranged surveillance of Lakeside Towers and confirmed that Audrey Whitlock, 65, occupied a penthouse apartment. She lived alone, had daily visits from a home health aide, and left only for weekly doctor appointments. "She's dying," Caleb reported as they sat in a rented SUV with tinted windows across from the building. "Terminal cancer. Her medical records show 6 months tops." Nolan processed this information. A dying woman has nothing to lose. Could make her dangerous or willing to talk. Exactly why we need to approach carefully. Caleb handed Nolan a small device. Wear this. It'll record everything and transmit to my secure server. Their plan was simple but effective. Caleb, posing as a home healthcare supervisor, would gain access to Audrey's apartment for a routine evaluation. Once inside, he would secure the space for Nolan to enter. The execution was flawless. Within 40 minutes, Nolan found himself standing in Audrey Whitlock's elegant living room, facing an emaciated woman seated in a motorized wheelchair by the window overlooking Lake Michigan. "I've been expecting someone from the Barrett family," Audrey said, her voice surprisingly strong despite her frail appearance. "Though I thought it would be federal agents, not Lawrence's son himself." Nolan remained standing, keeping his distance. "You know who I am?" "Of course. I helped select you as the target." She gestured weakly to a side table with a crystal decanter. "Pour yourself a drink. This conversation will require it." Nolan didn't move. "I'm not here for hospitality." Audrey's thin lips curved into a smile. "No, you're here for answers. About your wife, Peter Donovan, and why your father's case has reached out from the grave to destroy your life. Start talking." "Very well." Audrey adjusted her position slightly, wincing. "Your father was close to exposing a network that had infiltrated banking systems across 5 states. The Donovan operation wasn't just about money. It was about power, influence. Richard Donovan had judges, police, even a senator in his pocket. And you were their financial consultant." "I was the architect," Audrey corrected. "Richard was the face, but I designed the systems." "What does this have to do with Melissa?" Audrey's expression softened slightly. "Melissa is Richard's daughter. Her real name is Melissa Donovan. When your father's investigation got too close, Richard authorized your father's assassination. Though Nolan had suspected something like this, hearing it confirmed made his knees weak. He finally took that drink, pouring 2 fingers of whiskey with a steady hand that belied his inner turmoil. "After your father's death, the investigation faltered," Audrey continued. "But Richard was paranoid. He worried that Lawrence Barrett might have left evidence somewhere, past information to his son. The plan was to place Melissa in your life, gain your trust completely, and search for any evidence while monitoring you." "For 14 years?" Nolan asked incredulously. "We have a child together." Audrey's eyes flashed with something like regret. "The original plan was 3 years, maximum. Melissa was supposed to find any hidden evidence, then divorce you and move on. But something unexpected happened." "What?" "2 things, actually. First, you inherited your grandfather's construction company and properties, making you suddenly very wealthy. Second," Audrey hesitated, "Melissa fell in love with you. Genuinely. She deviated from the plan." Nolan scoffed. "If that were true, I wouldn't be here now. For almost 10 years, she refused to complete her assignment. She built a life with you, had Lila, seemed to forget her purpose." Audrey took a labored breath. "Then Richard was diagnosed with terminal cancer 3 years ago. Before dying, he called in his daughter's death, reminded her of family loyalty. And Peter Donovan, her cousin, Richard's sister's son, he was sent to bring Melissa back in line, remind her of her obligations. They were close as children." Audrey's mouth twisted. "The affair was a bonus, I suppose. Peter always wanted what others had." Nolan paced the room, processing. "So the plan changed from finding evidence to collecting insurance money?" "Richard left his children nothing but debts and obligations. Peter convinced Melissa that a clean solution was needed. Your death, the insurance payout, a fresh start." Audrey's voice had grown weaker. "I advised against it. Old schemes, properly executed, leave no evidence. Murder investigations never truly close." "Why are you telling me all this?" Audrey gestured to her withered body. "I'm beyond consequences now, and I've had time to reflect on the lives we've destroyed. Not enough for redemption, perhaps, but enough to want certain truths known before I die." "I need proof," Nolan said. "Something I can use." Audrey nodded toward a painting on the far wall. "Behind that is a safe. Combination 18-42-7. Inside, you'll find a flash drive with banking records, communications, everything that connects the Donovans to your father's death and the current plot against you. Nolan followed her instructions, finding the safe and the drive exactly as described. When he turned back, Audrey's eyes had drifted to the window again. "One more thing," she said quietly. "Lila is innocent in all this. Whatever you do to Melissa and Peter, remember that the child loves both her parents." Nolan pocketed the drive. "I don't need parenting advice from someone who helped orchestrate my father's murder and my own planned death." As he turned to leave, Audrey called after him. "Barrett, there's something else you should know. Richard had another child, a son. He's not part of this current plan, but he'll come for you if you destroy his sister and cousin." "I'll be ready," Nolan replied, closing the door behind him. Outside, Caleb was waiting in the hallway. "Got everything?" Nolan patted his pocket where the flash drive sat. "Everything and more. Let's go." Back in Chicago, Nolan and Caleb reviewed the contents of the flash drive. It contained decades of records, bank statements, emails, photographs, and most damning of all, a video of Richard Donovan discussing Lawrence Barrett's removal with men Caleb identified as known hitmen from that era. "This is enough to reopen your father's case," Caleb said, "and to put Melissa and Peter away for conspiracy to commit murder." "Not yet," Nolan replied, staring at a wedding photo of him and Melissa. In it, her smile appeared genuine, loving. "Had any of it been real? I want them to face justice, but delivering this to the police doesn't feel like enough." "What are you thinking?" Nolan closed the laptop. "They took 14 years of my life. They made me love a lie. They were willing to orphan our daughter for money." His voice hardened. "Before the law takes them, I want them to lose everything, just like they planned for me." Caleb studied his friend carefully. "Revenge is a dangerous game, Nolan." "It's not just revenge," Nolan countered. "It's justice. For my father. For me. For Lila, who'll grow up knowing her mother was willing to kill her father." After a moment, Caleb nodded. "What's your plan?" Nolan opened his father's journal again. "Dad always said the best way to defeat your enemies is to understand them better than they understand themselves." He looked up at Caleb. "I'm going to become Melissa and Peter's worst nightmare. The man who knows all their secrets and can anticipate their every move." Chapter 5. The Architect's Gambit. Over the next 2 weeks, Nolan immersed himself in the evidence from Audrey's flash drive, constructing a complete picture of the Donovan family's operations, past and present. He worked from a suite at the Four Seasons Hotel, having swept it for bugs with Caleb's equipment. The distance from his contaminated home provided clarity. What emerged was a complex web of deceit spanning generations. The Donovans had built their criminal enterprise on targeting wealthy individuals through long-term infiltration. Sometimes it was marriage, other times friendship or business partnerships. Their patience was their greatest asset. Melissa wasn't their only plant, Nolan explained to Caleb as they reviewed documents. There are at least 5 other Donovan family members currently embedded with wealthy targets. "We should alert authorities," Caleb suggested. "These people are in danger." "We will," Nolan assured him. "But first, I need to handle Melissa and Peter my way." The foundation of Nolan's plan lay in understanding his wife better than she understood herself. After 14 years together, he knew her habits, fears, and weaknesses. Combined with the information from the flash drive, he had a comprehensive psychological profile. Melissa feared poverty above all else. Having grown up in the shadow of her father's criminal empire, she'd experienced both extreme wealth and sudden destitution when operations were disrupted. Her materialism wasn't mere greed. It was a desperate attempt to create security. Peter, meanwhile, was driven by resentment. Always in the shadow of his Uncle Richard and cousin Melissa, he'd spent his life trying to prove himself worthy of the Donovan name. His prison stint had further embittered him, making him reckless and vindictive. "They're still trying to access our accounts," Nolan noted, showing Caleb the alerts from his bank security system. 3 attempts yesterday alone. "They're getting desperate," Caleb observed. "The police investigation has them spooked, but they still need money to pay that high-priced lawyer." Nolan smiled coldly. "Perfect. It's time to give them what they want." The next day, Nolan met with his personal banker, Hartford Pullman, a distinguished man in his 60s who had managed the Barrett family's finances for decades. I need to arrange something unusual, Nolan explained after ensuring their conversation was private. I want to appear financially vulnerable. Hartford's eyebrows rose. In what way exactly? I want to create the illusion that my business is failing, that I'm liquidating assets to cover losses. May I ask why? Nolan provided a carefully edited version of the truth, enough for Hartford to understand the gravity without compromising the legal case being built. I see, the banker said thoughtfully. We can structure a series of transactions that would create that appearance without actually putting your assets at risk. A financial mirage, if you will. Exactly. And I need it to be convincing enough to fool someone with financial expertise who's motivated to find weakness. With Hartford's help, Nolan began implementing the first phase of his plan, creating a financial house of cards that would lure Melissa and Peter into action. To anyone examining his finances, it would appear that Nolan's construction company was hemorrhaging money on failed projects, forcing him to sell properties and withdraw from investments. Simultaneously, he engaged Vivian Rosario to draft divorce papers with very specific terms. These are unusually generous, Vivian noted, reviewing Nolan's proposed settlement, especially given the circumstances. They need to be believable, Nolan explained. Melissa knows I'd fight for custody of Lila, but she also knows I'd sacrifice almost anything to give our daughter stability. The proposed settlement offered Melissa the family home, a substantial monthly alimony, and shared custody of Lila. In exchange, Nolan would retain full ownership of his business and certain investment accounts. She'll see this as a victory, Nolan continued. She gets immediate assets while I keep long-term investments that appear to be failing anyway. Vivian's expression was skeptical. And what happens when she accepts? She won't, Nolan said confidently. Not yet. She'll want more. And that's when we'll give her exactly what she thinks she wants. The third component of Nolan's plan involved Lila. After careful consideration and consultation with a child psychologist, Nolan had a difficult conversation with his daughter about what was happening. Mom and I are going through some very serious problems, he explained as they sat in his hotel suite. Some of it involved bad decisions she's made. Lila's eyes were serious beyond her 13 years. Is Mom going to jail? Nolan chose his words carefully. There's an investigation happening. I don't know what will happen yet. Because of what she and Uncle Porter, or whatever his name is, were planning to do to you. Yes, Nolan confirmed, impressed by her perception. How do you feel about that? Lila looked down at her hands. Scared, confused, but also angry. How could she even think about hurting you? About making me not have a dad anymore? Nolan pulled her into a hug. I promise you'll always have me, no matter what happens with the investigation or between your mother and me. I don't want to stay with her, Lila said firmly. Not right now. I understand, but I need your help with something important. Nolan explained that for the next few weeks, he wanted Lila to continue staying with Beverly, but to have supervised visits with Melissa. During these visits, she shouldn't mention anything about Nolan's current activities or whereabouts. It's not about lying, he clarified. It's about privacy until some legal matters are resolved. Lila nodded solemnly. I can do that. With all pieces in place, Nolan initiated contact with Melissa for the first time since the confrontation. He arranged to meet at her lawyer's office, where he delivered the proposed divorce settlement in person. Melissa looked thinner, her designer outfit and perfect makeup unable to hide the strain of the past weeks. When she saw Nolan, a complex mixture of emotions crossed her face. Guilt, anger, calculation, and something that might have been genuine regret. Nolan, she began, her voice soft. Save it, he interrupted. I'm not here for apologies or explanations. I'm here to end our marriage as efficiently as possible. Winston Caldwell, Melissa's attorney, reviewed the settlement with a frown. These terms are surprisingly reasonable, Mr. Barrett. I just want this over with, Nolan replied, projecting exhaustion and defeat. The business is in trouble. I don't have the energy for a prolonged legal battle. Melissa's eyes narrowed slightly. What happened with the European projects? Complications, cost overruns, the usual problems compounded by my absence. Nolan shrugged. I should have been there instead of coming home early that day. The irony of his statement hung in the air between them. I'll need time to review these terms with my client, Caldwell stated professionally. Take all the time you need, Nolan replied, standing to leave. Meanwhile, I've arranged for Melissa to have supervised visits with Lila at Beverly's house. The details are in the paperwork. As he turned to go, Melissa called after him. Nolan, wait. What about the police investigation? The allegations you made? He looked back at her, his expression carefully blank. That's between you and the authorities. This divorce is separate. As he walked out, Nolan knew Melissa wouldn't accept the settlement immediately. She'd consult with Peter. They'd investigate his financial situation and discover exactly what he wanted them to find: vulnerability, distraction, and opportunity. Back at the hotel, Caleb was waiting with updates on their surveillance of Peter Donovan. He met with someone interesting today, Caleb reported, showing Nolan photographs of Peter with a severe-looking man outside a downtown parking garage. Desmond Lynch, former enforcer for several Chicago crime families, now works freelance, specializes in making problems disappear. Nolan studied the image. They're getting impatient. The police investigation and frozen accounts have them cornered, which makes them dangerous, Caleb warned. We should consider bringing in law enforcement now. Not yet, Nolan insisted. First, I need them to make one more move, the one that will destroy them completely. That night, Nolan made a call to Detective Reeves, providing a carefully controlled update while withholding key information about his own activities. I've hired private security, he explained, given the potential threat. Smart move, Reeves acknowledged. We're building our case, but these investigations take time. The insurance fraud is solid, but proving murder conspiracy is trickier. I understand. Just keep me updated. After hanging up, Nolan turned to Caleb. How soon can we implement the final phase? The technical aspects are ready, Caleb confirmed. But are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. Nolan looked at the wall where he'd pinned photographs of his father, Lila, and even one of him and Melissa on their wedding day. In that moment, he felt the last traces of love for his wife evaporate, replaced by cold determination. I'm sure, he said. They took everything from my father. They try to take everything from me. Now it's their turn to lose. Chapter 6, Checkmate. The Barrett-Donovan chess match accelerated over the next week. As Nolan had predicted, Melissa rejected the initial settlement offer, countering with demands for additional assets. Specifically, an interest in Nolan's grandfather's trust fund that had been established for future generations. She's getting greedy, Vivian observed during their strategy meeting, which means she's getting nervous. Exactly as planned, Nolan replied. Her lawyer must be charging a fortune, and with their assets frozen during the investigation, they're running out of options. The counterproposal provided Nolan the opening he needed. He requested a direct meeting with Melissa, no lawyers present, at a neutral location. They met at an upscale restaurant with private dining rooms, the kind of establishment where discretion was paramount. Melissa arrived in a black dress that Nolan recognized. He'd given it to her for their 10th anniversary. The choice wasn't accidental. Thank you for agreeing to meet, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. I've missed you. Nolan maintained a neutral expression. This isn't a reconciliation, Melissa. It's negotiation. Her smile faltered slightly. Of course. Business first. For the next hour, they discussed the divorce terms. Nolan strategically appeared to concede on certain points while firmly rejecting others, particularly regarding the trust fund. That money is for Lila's future, he insisted. It's non-negotiable. I understand protecting Lila, Melissa replied, reaching across the table to touch his hand. He pulled away. But you know I only want what's fair after 14 years together. Fair. Nolan felt genuine anger rise. Was it fair when you and Peter planned to collect my life insurance? Was that for Lila's future too? Melissa's expression hardened momentarily before softening into calculated remorse. Those allegations are absurd, and you know it. Peter and I made a terrible mistake with the affair, but we never planned to harm you. Then explain the insurance policy with my forged signature. I was trying to protect our family, she countered smoothly. You travel constantly for work, often to dangerous construction sites. I wanted security if something happened. And the text about evidence, about me never coming back? For a moment, Melissa faltered. Then her expression shifted to something Nolan had rarely seen. Cold calculation without pretense. You want the truth, Nolan? Fine. When I realized you discovered the affair, I panicked. Peter suggested we could use certain irregularities in your business practices as leverage in a divorce. The evidence was some questionable transaction records Peter found while helping me organize the home office. It was a clever pivot, admitting to a lesser offense to cover the greater one. If Nolan hadn't seen the flash drive contents, he might have even believed her. What business irregularities? He asked, feigning concern. Melissa shrugged elegantly. Tax discrepancies, mainly. Nothing criminal, just aggressive deductions. But enough to make a divorce messy if exposed. Nolan allowed worry to show on his face. I see. Sensing advantage, Melissa pressed forward. I'll tell you what. Keep the trust fund intact for Lila. Instead, give me the Madison Street properties. They're underperforming anyway, according to your last portfolio review. The Madison Street properties were among Nolan's most valuable assets, though recent financial reports, artificially manipulated, showed them operating at a loss. I need to think about that, Nolan replied cautiously. Those properties have been in my family for generations. But they're draining your resources now, Melissa countered. Consider it a clean break. You get your irregularities back. I get the properties. Lila's trust remains untouched, and we can all move forward. By the end of dinner, Nolan had projected enough reluctance and vulnerability that Melissa believed she'd won a major concession. They agreed to have their lawyers draft a revised agreement incorporating the Madison Street properties in exchange for Melissa withdrawing all claims to the trust fund and other business assets. As they prepared to leave, Melissa touched his arm again. For what it's worth, Nolan, not everything was a lie. I did love you. Part of me still does. Nolan looked into her eyes, the same eyes that had gazed at him with apparent adoration for 14 years. The same eyes that had watched him leave for Europe, possibly never to return if her plans had succeeded. That's the tragedy, isn't it? He replied quietly. I'll never know what was real and what wasn't. Back at his hotel, Nolan updated Caleb on the meeting's outcome. She took the bait, he confirmed. Now we wait for her to bring Peter into the equation. They didn't have to wait long. Their surveillance captured Melissa meeting Peter at his apartment that same night. Through listening devices Caleb had planted, they heard the entire conversation. He's giving up the Madison properties, Melissa reported triumphantly. Once those are transferred to me, we'll have the collateral we need. For what? Peter asked. To disappear. The police investigation isn't going away. That detective keeps digging into the insurance policy. We need to cash out and vanish before they put everything together. Peter's voice grew cautious. What about Lynch? He's expecting payment for the Barrett problem. Tell him plans have changed. We don't need those services anymore. The properties are worth 10 times what we would have gotten from the insurance anyway. And Lila, Melissa paused. She'll be better off with Nolan while we establish ourselves somewhere new. Once we're settled, I'll find a way to bring her to us. The conversation confirmed what Nolan had suspected. They were planning to liquidate the properties and flee the country. It was the final piece he needed. The next morning, Nolan contacted Hartford Pullman with instructions to prepare the necessary documents for transferring the Madison Street properties. Simultaneously, he reached out to Detective Reeves. I have reason to believe Melissa and Peter Donovan are planning to flee the jurisdiction, he reported. And I've obtained new evidence connecting them to a larger criminal organization. Reeves was skeptical. What evidence? I prefer to deliver it in person, Nolan replied, along with additional information about my father's murder in 2003. The detective's tone changed immediately. Your father's case? Are you saying there's a connection? A direct one. I can be at the station tomorrow morning with everything. That evening, Nolan met with Vivian to review the transfer documents for the Madison properties. The papers appeared legitimate, transferring full ownership to Melissa Barrett with no encumbrances or restrictions. These look completely standard, Vivian noted. No hidden clauses, no delayed transfer mechanisms. Exactly as they should, Nolan confirmed. Melissa and her lawyer need to believe this is a straightforward transfer. And the actual arrangement? Nolan smiled. Is documented in separate paperwork that will be filed simultaneously by Hartford. It's completely legal, I assure you. The final meeting was scheduled for 2 days later at Vivian's office. Enough time for Melissa and Peter to make arrangements, but not enough for them to execute an escape before the transfer was complete. When the day arrived, Nolan entered the conference room where Melissa, Winston Caldwell, and Vivian were already seated. He carried a slim portfolio containing the transfer documents. Before we begin, Nolan announced, I'd like to clarify that these properties represent a clean break between us. Once signed, our financial entanglements will be completely severed. That's our understanding as well, Caldwell confirmed, eyeing the portfolio eagerly. Melissa smiled, confidence radiating from her. I appreciate your reasonableness, Nolan. This is best for everyone. I agree, Nolan replied, opening the portfolio and sliding the documents across the table. Best for everyone. As Melissa and her lawyer reviewed the papers, there was a knock at the conference room door. Detective Reeves entered, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers. Melissa Donovan, Peter Donovan, Reeves announced, nodding toward the window where Peter could be seen in the waiting area, pacing nervously. You're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, identity theft, and obstruction of justice. Melissa's face drained of color. What is this? Nolan, what have you done? Justice, Nolan replied simply. For my father. For myself. For Lila. As the officers entered the room to execute the arrest, Nolan placed a flash drive on the table. Detective Reeves, this contains evidence connecting Melissa and Peter Donovan to the murder of federal prosecutor Lawrence Barrett in 2003, as well as their recent conspiracy to kill me for insurance money. Melissa lunged for the drive, but one of the officers restrained her. You can't do this, she hissed at Nolan. You have no proof. Actually, I have everything, including recordings of your conversation with Peter 2 nights ago about fleeing the country with the proceeds from the Madison properties. Winston Caldwell stood abruptly. My client has nothing further to say. We'll address these outrageous allegations in court. As Melissa was handcuffed, she fixed Nolan with a venomous glare. This isn't over. Richard had more children than just me. They'll come for you. I'm counting on it, Nolan replied calmly. After Melissa and Peter were escorted out, Detective Reeves turned to Nolan. That flash drive better contain what you promised. It does. And more. It'll reopen several cold cases connected to the Donovan family's operations. Reeves studied him carefully. You set them up with those properties, didn't you? Made them think they had an escape route. The transfer documents are completely legitimate, Nolan replied. What Melissa didn't know is that I transferred ownership of those properties to a trust for victims of the Donovan family's crimes 2 days ago. She was going to try to sell properties she no longer owned. Later that day, Nolan returned to his house for the first time in weeks. Beverly brought Lila home, and father and daughter stood in the foyer, looking around at the space that had once been their family home. Mom's really not coming back, is she? Lila asked quietly. No, sweetheart. She's not. Nolan put his arm around her shoulders. But you and I are going to be okay. I promise. As they walked through the house, Nolan mentally cataloged all the changes he would make. New furniture, new paint, new memories to replace the contaminated ones. His phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. Transfers complete. Justice fund established. Ready for phase 2 when you are. Nolan smiled slightly. The Donovans had thought they were playing a long game. They hadn't realized who they were playing against. What's next, Dad? Lila asked, watching his expression. Nolan pocketed his phone. Next, we rebuild. And then, we finish what my father started. Chapter 7, Reclamation. 6 months passed since Melissa and Peter's arrests. The case had become one of the most publicized criminal proceedings in Chicago's recent history, with media outlets dubbing it the Barrett betrayal. Prosecutors had added charges as the investigation uncovered more evidence connecting the Donovans to a multi-state criminal enterprise. Nolan had sold their family home, unable to live comfortably in a space filled with 14 years of deception. He and Lila moved into a renovated loft in the West Loop, a symbolic fresh start in a place without memories or ghosts. On a warm July morning, Nolan sat in the courtroom gallery watching as Melissa entered in handcuffs, the orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the designer clothes she'd once worn. She'd lost weight during her pretrial detention, her once perfect appearance now stripped of artifice. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Hers still held defiance, though the confident gleam had dimmed considerably. Today was the final day of testimony before the jury would begin deliberations. The prosecution had built an airtight case, bolstered by the evidence from Audrey Whitlock's flash drive and additional material Nolan had provided from his father's records. Audrey herself had died 3 months earlier, but not before providing a video deposition that detailed decades of Donovan family operations, including their role in Lawrence Barrett's death. As the proceedings began, District Attorney Vanessa Mitchell approached the witness stand where Nolan was about to give his final testimony. "Mr. Barrett," she began after he was sworn in, "you've testified previously about discovering your wife's affair and the subsequent revelations about her true identity and intentions. Today, I'd like to focus on what you found regarding your father's case." Nolan nodded. "My father, Lawrence Barrett, was investigating Richard Donovan's financial crimes in 2003. According to evidence recovered from Audrey Whitlock, Richard Donovan authorized my father's murder when the investigation threatened to expose their entire operation. And how does this connect to the conspiracy against you? Richard Donovan used his daughter, my wife, Melissa, to infiltrate my life, initially to determine if I had access to any evidence my father might have hidden." Nolan's voice remained steady despite the pain of recounting these truths. "When my grandfather died and I inherited his construction business and properties, the plan evolved into a long-term financial extraction." "Could you explain what you mean by financial extraction?" "Melissa systematically transferred funds from our joint accounts to private accounts controlled by the Donovan family. When Richard Donovan was diagnosed with terminal cancer, he pressured Melissa to accelerate their plans, bringing in Peter Donovan to help orchestrate my death for insurance money." The testimony continued for another hour, with Nolan methodically detailing the evidence trail he'd uncovered. When the defense attorney, Winston Caldwell, had been replaced by a public defender after Melissa's assets were frozen, attempted to cross-examine him, Nolan's responses remained unshakable. "Mr. Barrett," the defense attorney pressed, "isn't it possible that your interpretation of these events has been colored by the emotional trauma of discovering your wife's infidelity?" "No," Nolan replied firmly. "My conclusions are based on documented evidence, recorded conversations, financial records, and sworn testimony from Audrey Whitlock, who was a principal architect of the Donovan organization. My emotional response to my wife's betrayal is separate from the factual evidence of her crimes." When the day's proceedings concluded, Nolan left the courthouse accompanied by Caleb, who had remained by his side throughout the trial as both security and support. "The jury won't take long," Caleb predicted as they navigated through the press gathered outside. "The case is solid. It's not just about convictions anymore," Nolan replied, sliding into the waiting SUV. "It's about dismantling the entire Donovan network." Over the past months, Nolan had channeled his pain and anger into purpose. The Barrett Justice Foundation, funded initially by the Madison Street properties, had grown into a formidable organization dedicated to identifying and supporting victims of long-term financial fraud. Working with federal authorities, the foundation had already helped expose 3 other Donovan family members embedded with wealthy targets. Back at his office, converted from part of his loft, Nolan found Lila doing homework at her desk in the corner. She looked up as he entered, a small smile replacing her usual serious expression. "How was court?" she asked. "Final testimony today. Jury deliberations start tomorrow." He loosened his tie and sat beside her. "How was school?" "Fine. Miss Carmichael says my essay on trust and betrayal might be published in the school literary magazine." Nolan felt the familiar mixture of pride and sadness that often accompanied Lila's accomplishments these days. At 14, she was processing trauma that would challenge most adults channeling it into remarkably insightful writing and art. "That's wonderful," he said genuinely. "Have you decided if you want to attend the sentencing hearing? If they reach a verdict this week, it could be as soon as next month." Lila considered the question carefully. "I think I should be there. Not for her, but for me. For closure." Nolan nodded, respecting her decision, while wishing she didn't have to face such adult realities so young. His phone buzzed with a text from Detective Reeves. "Need to talk. New development. Can you meet?" "I have to go out again," Nolan told Lila. "Detective Reeves needs to see me. Beverly's downstairs if you need anything." "I know the drill, Dad," Lila replied with a hint of teenage exasperation that had recently begun to reassert itself, a healthy sign amid the trauma. Nolan met Reeves at a small cafe several blocks from his loft. The detective, now a familiar presence in their lives, looked troubled. "We've identified Richard Donovan's son," Reeves said without preamble, sliding a photograph across the table. "Frederick Donovan, 47, former military intelligence, disappeared off the grid about 10 years ago. Facial recognition picked him up entering the country 3 days ago." Nolan studied the image. A tall man with features reminiscent of Richard Donovan, but harder, more disciplined. "Audrey warned me about him. He's dangerous, Nolan. Much more so than Peter or Melissa. His military record shows extensive training in covert operations before he was dishonorably discharged for conduct unbecoming. Which means he has skills and connections most criminals don't." Reeves lowered his voice. "We have reason to believe he's planning to disrupt the trial's conclusion, possibly targeting you or even Lila." Cold fear gripped Nolan. "I have security measures in place." "Double them," Reeves advised. "We're monitoring Frederick, but he's trained to evade surveillance. Until the trial concludes and sentencing is complete, consider yourself at maximum risk." After Reeves left, Nolan immediately called Caleb, updating him on the threat. Caleb's response was immediate and comprehensive. Additional security personnel, enhanced monitoring systems for the loft, and a revised protocol for Lila's school transportation. That night, after ensuring Lila was asleep, Nolan opened his father's journal again, seeking guidance from the man who had first confronted the Donovan family. Lawrence Barrett's final entries, written days before his death, seemed eerily prescient. The Donovans aren't like other criminal families. They don't just seek profit, they seek control. When threatened, they don't merely eliminate the threat. They systematically destroy everything the threat holds dear. If my suspicions are correct, I must prepare not just for my own safety, but for Nolan's as well. Nolan traced his father's handwriting, feeling a connection that transcended death. "I finished what you started, Dad," he whispered, "but it seems there's one more battle to fight." Over the next week, as the jury deliberated, Nolan prepared for Frederick Donovan's inevitable move. He adjusted his routine, varied his routes to and from the courthouse, and implemented Caleb's enhanced security protocols. Lila chafed slightly under the restrictions, but understood their necessity. The jury returned with a verdict faster than anyone anticipated, guilty on all counts for both Melissa and Peter. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. As Nolan left the courthouse after the verdict announcement, a text arrived from an unknown number. "You took my sister and cousin. Blood demands blood. This isn't over." He showed the message to Caleb and Reeves, who immediately initiated traces and heightened alert status. "He's making contact," Reeves noted. "That means he's ready to move. Or wants us to think he is," Caleb countered. "Could be psychological warfare." Nolan considered both possibilities. "Either way, we need to be ready." The first attempt came 3 days later. Nolan was leaving his office downtown when a motorcycle pulled alongside his car at a traffic light. Caleb, driving, noticed the rider's hand moving inside his jacket and accelerated through the red light moments before shots were fired. The police found the abandoned motorcycle 6 blocks away. The rider had vanished. "He's testing our reflexes," Caleb assessed afterward, "learning our security protocols." The next attempt targeted Lila. A man posing as a substitute teacher attempted to remove her from class for an emergency family meeting. The school's enhanced security protocols, implemented at Nolan's insistence after Melissa's arrest, prevented the abduction. By the time police arrived, the man had disappeared. Lila, shaken but resilient, faced the incident with remarkable composure. "He won't stop, will he?" she asked Nolan that evening. "No," Nolan answered honestly. "Not until we stop him." The night before the sentencing hearing, Nolan received another text. "Tomorrow ends it. One way or another." After consulting with Reeves and Caleb, they devised a plan. The courthouse would be secured, with plainclothes officers supplementing regular security. Nolan and Lila would arrive via a different entrance than publicly announced. And most critically, they would use Frederick's fixation on the sentencing as an opportunity to set a trap of their own. The morning of the sentencing dawned clear and cool. Nolan and Lila prepared in silence, both understanding the gravity of the day ahead. Before leaving, Nolan took his daughter's hands in his. "No matter what happens today, remember that I love you," he said, "and that sometimes justice requires sacrifice." Lila nodded, her eyes reflecting understanding beyond her years. "I know, Dad. I'm ready." The courthouse was a fortress of security when they arrived through the judge's private entrance. Reeves met them in a secured room adjacent to the courtroom. "Frederick was spotted 3 blocks away 20 minutes ago," he reported. "He's coming." Nolan nodded. "Then let's finish this." Inside the courtroom, Melissa and Peter were brought in separately, both looking resigned to their fate. When Melissa spotted Lila sitting beside Nolan, a flicker of emotion crossed her face, perhaps the first genuine maternal feeling she'd shown since her arrest. Judge Abernathy entered, and the proceedings began with the prosecutor's sentencing recommendations: 25 years to life for Melissa, 20 to life for Peter. The defense made token arguments for leniency that even they seemed to know were futile. When given the opportunity to speak before sentencing, Peter declined, but Melissa rose slowly. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steadier than her appearance suggested, "I won't insult this court by claiming innocence or asking for mercy I don't deserve. My actions were calculated, harmful, and wrong." She turned slightly toward Nolan and Lila. "To my husband and daughter, I can only say that amid the lies, some things were real. My love for Lila was never false, even if everything else was." She paused, appearing to struggle with her next words. "There's something else the court should know. My brother, Frederick, is dangerous in ways Peter and I never were. He believes in family above all else and will seek retribution for what he sees as betrayal." Her eyes met Nolan's directly. "He's here today. I feel it. And he won't stop until he completes what he considers family justice." Judge Abernathy frowned. "Ms. Donovan, if you have specific information about a threat to this court or the Barrett family, you should share it with authorities immediately." "I've told you what I know, Your Honor. The rest is up to him." As if on cue, a commotion erupted in the hallway outside. Gunshots echoed, followed by shouting. The courtroom deputies moved to secure the judge and doors, while Caleb positioned himself between Nolan, Lila, and the entrance. The main doors burst open. Frederick Donovan stood in the doorway, weapon raised, his eyes finding Nolan immediately. "Barrett," he shouted, "this ends now." What happened next occurred with such speed that witnesses later gave conflicting accounts. Frederick fired. Nolan shoved Lila down behind a bench. Caleb moved to intercept, taking a bullet in the shoulder. Reeves and 2 deputies returned fire. And Melissa Donovan, in what would be debated as either her final manipulation or her only genuine act, broke from her guard and placed herself in the line of fire between her brother and her daughter. 3 bullets struck her chest. She collapsed as Frederick, hit twice by deputies' fire, fell to his knees. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Medical personnel rushed in. Lila screamed. Nolan crawled to his daughter, shielding her with his body as the final shots were fired. When the gunfire stopped, Frederick Donovan lay dead near the doorway. Peter Donovan was secured in a corner by deputies. And Melissa, bleeding heavily on the courtroom floor, reached a hand toward Lila. "I'm sorry," she whispered as paramedics worked frantically to save her. "For everything." Her eyes shifted to Nolan. "Not everything was a lie. Remember that." Her hand fell. The paramedics continued CPR, but the outcome was already clear in their expressions. In the aftermath, as statements were taken and wounds treated, Nolan sat with Lila in a secured room, his arm around her shoulders as she processed what she'd witnessed. Did she really try to save me? Lila asked, her voice small. Or was it just her final performance? Nolan considered the question carefully. I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe both. Maybe in the end, loving you is the one true thing in her life of lies. Do you think she ever loved you? Really? The question struck at the heart of the pain Nolan had carried for the past year. I think she might have in her way, but love without truth isn't really love at all. Chapter 8, Collateral Damage. The media dubbed it the Courtroom Massacre. 3 dead, Frederick Donovan, Melissa, and a court deputy caught in the crossfire. 4 wounded, including Caleb. The images dominated news cycles for weeks, with endless analysis of security failures, Melissa's final act, and the Barrett family tragedy. Nolan retreated from public view with Lila, taking her to his grandfather's lake house in Wisconsin while the furor died down. There, surrounded by nature and silence, they began the difficult process of true healing. I don't know if I want to attend her funeral, Lila admitted one evening as they sat on the dock watching the sunset. Is that terrible of me? No, Nolan assured her. Your feelings are valid, whatever they are. Complicated relationships leave complicated grief. Were you going to go? Nolan had been wrestling with this question himself. I think I need to, not for her, but for my own closure, to truly end this chapter. The funeral was a small, subdued affair. Despite Melissa's crimes, her defense attorney had arranged a simple service. To Nolan's surprise, several people from their former social circle attended, along with a few older individuals he didn't recognize but suspected were distant Donovan relatives keeping a low profile. Peter Donovan, his sentencing postponed due to the courtroom incident, was permitted to attend under heavy guard. He nodded curtly to Nolan but maintained his distance. After the service, as people dispersed, a woman in her 60s approached Nolan. Mr. Barrett, she said quietly. I'm Eleanor Whitlock, Audrey's sister. Nolan tensed slightly. I wasn't aware Audrey had a sister. Few were. I distanced myself from her activities years ago. Eleanor's eyes were tired but clear. I wanted to offer my condolences for whatever they're worth. And to give you this. She handed him a small envelope. Audrey left instructions to deliver this to you after everything was over. Said you'd understand when the time came. With that, she walked away, leaving Nolan holding the envelope. He waited until he was alone in his car to open it. Inside was a memory card and a handwritten note in Audrey's precise handwriting. Barrett, if you're reading this, the endgame has played out as expected. You've proven yourself your father's son, more formidable than Richard ever anticipated. There's one final piece you should have: locations of all Donovan assets never discovered by authorities. Some are legitimate businesses now, generations removed from their criminal origins. Others remain active components of operations you've yet to uncover. Why give you this? Perhaps atonement. Perhaps recognition that some systems deserve dismantling. Use it wisely. A.W. The memory card contained exactly what Audrey had promised. A comprehensive map of Donovan family assets spanning 5 decades and 12 states. It was a financial treasure map that could dismantle what remained of their criminal enterprise. Nolan took the information directly to FBI Special Agent Dominic Rhodes, who had taken over the federal aspects of the case after the courthouse shooting. This is extraordinary, Rhodes said after reviewing the data. With this, we could potentially seize hundreds of millions in criminal proceeds, disrupt ongoing operations we weren't even aware of. That's the intention, Nolan confirmed. Rhodes studied him curiously. Most people in your position would want to put this behind them, not dive deeper into the organization that destroyed their family. I'm not most people. Nolan's expression was resolute. My father died trying to bring down the Donovans. My wife died as part of their legacy of manipulation and violence. I won't stop until every piece of their operation is dismantled. Over the next several months, Nolan worked closely with federal authorities, expanding the Barrett Justice Foundation's mission to support law enforcement efforts against organized crime. The foundation established a witness protection fund, helping others who came forward against criminal organizations. Lila, still processing her mother's death and final actions, threw herself into school and therapy. Her essays on trust, betrayal, and forgiveness gained attention beyond the school literary magazine, with one being published in a national collection of writings by children affected by crime. One evening, as Nolan was reviewing foundation documents in his home office, Lila appeared in the doorway. "I've been thinking," she said, leaning against the frame, "about what Mom said at the end, that not everything was a lie." Nolan set down his papers. "What about it? I think I believe her. Not about everything, but about loving me." Lila twisted a bracelet on her wrist, one Melissa had given her years earlier. "Because I remember moments when it was just us, when she didn't know you were listening or watching. The way she looked at me then, it felt real." Nolan nodded slowly. "I think you're right. Even the most skilled liars have moments of truth. Does that make it better or worse?" Lila asked. "That she could love me and still be willing to take away my father?" "I don't know," Nolan admitted. "Human emotions are complicated. She compartmentalized, loved you in one part of her mind while planning terrible things in another." Lila considered this. "Kind of like you did with your revenge plan. You loved me, but still focused on destroying her." The observation caught Nolan off guard with its insightfulness. "That's a fair point. Though my intentions were different." "Were they?" Lila challenged. "You wanted justice, but you also wanted revenge. Mom wanted security, but was willing to hurt others to get it. You're both more alike than you'd want to admit." The comparison unsettled Nolan deeply. Had his pursuit of justice crossed into the same territory as Melissa's criminal activities? Had he become so focused on vengeance that he'd employed the same compartmentalization he condemned in her? These questions haunted him as the final Donovan sentencing approached. Peter, the last defendant, had agreed to a plea deal in exchange for information about operations even Audrey's files hadn't revealed. The day before the sentencing, Nolan received a request from Peter to meet privately. Against Caleb's advice, he agreed, with proper security measures in place. They sat across from each other in a small conference room at the detention center, Peter in his prison jumpsuit, Nolan in a suit that cost more than most inmates would see in a decade. "Thank you for coming," Peter began, his once arrogant demeanor subdued by months in detention. "I know you have no reason to do me any favors." "I'm curious what you could possibly have to say to me," Nolan replied evenly. Peter leaned forward slightly. "I wanted you to know that Melissa didn't start out planning to hurt you. The original assignment was just surveillance, maybe some financial redirection. The insurance scheme, that was my idea after Richard's diagnosis. Why tell me this now? Because despite everything, she did care about you, and she adored Lila." Peter's expression turned contemplative. "In another life, without Richard's influence, without our family history, she might have just been your wife, not your destruction." Nolan considered this. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No, just to understand." Peter hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Frederick wasn't just coming for you that day. He was coming for all of us, me included." "What are you talking about?" "Frederick believed in the old ways, family loyalty above all. When Melissa and I agreed to cooperate with prosecutors, we betrayed that code. He saw us as traitors, same as you." The revelation shifted Nolan's understanding of the courthouse massacre. So Melissa really did save Lila? Not just from Frederick's bullets meant for me, but from his plan for all of you. Peter nodded slowly. "I believe so. Her last act was probably the most honest of her life." As Nolan drove home from the detention center, his mind wrestled with this new perspective. If Peter was telling the truth, still a significant if, then Melissa's final moments represented something genuine amid years of deception. He found Lila waiting for him, her expression suggesting she had news of her own. "Dad, I've decided something," she announced as he hung up his coat. "After the sentencing tomorrow, I want to visit Mom's grave, and I want you to come with me." The request surprised him. "Are you sure?" Lila nodded firmly. "I need to say goodbye properly." to the real parts and the fake parts. All of it. The next day, after Peter received his negotiated 15-year sentence, Nolan and Lila stood before Melissa's simple grave marker. Lila had brought a small bouquet of wildflowers. Nothing formal or traditional. "I don't forgive you," Lila said to the stone, her voice steady. "But I acknowledge that you loved me in your way. And I'm choosing to remember the real moments, even knowing there were false ones too." She placed the flowers at the base of the headstone. "I'm going to be okay," she continued. "Dad and I both will. Not because of you, but despite you. And maybe a little bit because of the parts of you that were true." When she finished, she turned to Nolan. "Your turn." Nolan hadn't planned to speak. He'd come for Lila's sake, not his own. But standing there, facing the physical representation of 14 years of lies and the mother of his child, words formed. "You took so much from me," he said quietly. "Time, trust, the future we pretended to build. But you gave me Lila, and for that, only that, I can say thank you." He paused, feeling the weight of unresolved emotion. "I hope your final act was real. I choose to believe it was for Lila's sake. But I will never forgive what you and your family did to my father, to me, to us." As they walked back to the car, Lila slipped her hand into his, something she hadn't done since before the betrayal. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked. Nolan squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, different than before, but okay. Maybe even stronger." Chapter 9. Phoenix Rising. 1 year after the courthouse shooting, Nolan stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton, addressing the 300 guests attending the Barrett Justice Foundation's first annual gala. "When my father was killed 22 years ago," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "He was fighting to expose a criminal organization that had infiltrated financial systems across the Midwest. When that same organization targeted me and my family, I discovered that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied." The crowd, comprised of law enforcement officials, victims of financial crimes, supporters, and donors, listened intently. In the past year, the Barrett Justice Foundation has assisted in the identification and prosecution of 17 long-term financial fraud schemes, recovered over $60 million in stolen assets, and provided support services to more than 200 victims. But our work is just beginning. At a table near the front, Lila watched her father with evident pride. Now 15, she had blossomed despite the trauma of the previous year, channeling her experiences into advocacy for children affected by parental crimes. Beside her sat Caleb Weston, fully recovered from his wound, and now the foundation's head of security. Detective, now Captain, Reeves was also present, along with FBI Agent Rhodes and Beverly Thomason, who had remained a steadfast support for both Nolan and Lila. "Tonight, I'm pleased to announce the establishment of the Lawrence Barrett Scholarship for Criminal Justice Studies," Nolan continued, "providing full university funding for children of law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty. Additionally, we're launching a national awareness campaign about long-term financial infiltration schemes, with educational resources for financial institutions and private citizens." After his speech concluded and the formal proceedings transitioned to dinner, Nolan made his way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and discussing future initiatives with supporters. Agent Rhodes pulled him aside briefly. "The last of the Donovan holdings were seized last week," he reported quietly. "Between Audrey's information and Peter's cooperation, we've dismantled an operation that spanned 5 decades. Your father would be proud." Nolan nodded, feeling a sense of completion that had eluded him for years. "There's still work to do. Other organizations, other victims. Always will be," Rhodes agreed. "But tonight, take the win." Later that evening, as the gala wound down, Nolan found Lila outside on the terrace, gazing at the Chicago skyline. "Quite a night," he said, joining her at the railing. "You were amazing," she replied. "Grandpa Lawrence would have loved it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Lila spoke again. "I got a letter yesterday. From Peter Donovan." Nolan tensed slightly. What did he want? To apologize, mainly, and to let me know he's providing information about other families like the Donovans. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "He said Mom will be proud of me." How do you feel about that? Lila considered the question carefully. Complicated. I don't know if I believe him about Mom, or if I care what she would think. But I've decided something important. What's that? I'm not letting what happened define me. Not Mom's betrayal. Not your revenge. Not any of it. She turned to face him fully. I'm going to build something of my own, something that helps people, but isn't just about the past. Nolan recognized the determination in her eyes, the same resolve that had carried him through his darkest days. But in Lila, it was tempered with a wisdom he'd only gained through painful experience. I think that's the best revenge of all, he said softly. Living well, on your own terms. The Foundation Gala marked a turning point. Having achieved justice for his father and himself, Nolan gradually shifted his focus from vengeance to rebuilding. His construction business, temporarily neglected during the Donovan pursuit, began to thrive again with innovative projects that emphasized community revitalization. The Barrett name, briefly notorious for scandal, became associated with integrity and advocacy. Nolan established ethical business standards that industry peers alternately admired and resented for raising the bar. Personal healing came more slowly. Dating remained difficult. Trust didn't come easily after such profound betrayal. There were brief relationships, a fellow Foundation board member, an architect collaborating on a development project, but Nolan approached each with caution bordering on detachment. Until Alexandra Mercer entered his orbit. A federal prosecutor assigned to cases developed through the Foundation's work, she approached relationships with the same careful scrutiny as Nolan. Widowed young when her police officer husband was killed in the line of duty, she understood loss and betrayal intimately. Their professional collaboration evolved gradually into friendship, then something deeper. Alexandra never pushed for more than Nolan could give, respecting the boundaries his experience had established. On the second anniversary of the courthouse shooting, Nolan visited Melissa's grave alone. He brought no flowers, spoke no words, simply stood in silent acknowledgement of a chapter closed. Later that day, he invited Alexandra to the lake house where he and Lila had begun their healing journey. As they walked along the shoreline, Nolan found himself sharing plans rather than dwelling on the past. I'm thinking of expanding the Foundation's work internationally, he said as they skipped stones across the calm water. There are similar fraud patterns emerging in Eastern Europe and South America. Alexandra nodded thoughtfully. It makes sense. These organizations are increasingly global. Our response should be too. Would you consider consulting on the international legal frameworks? Your experience with cross-border prosecution would be invaluable. She smiled, catching the professional request that masked a more personal one. I'd be happy to, though I suspect this invitation wasn't entirely about Foundation business. Nolan returned her smile, feeling lighter than he had in years. Partially Foundation business. Partially because Lila thinks highly of you. And partially because I do too. High praise from the Barretts, Alexandra replied, her expression warm. I accept all parts of the invitation. That evening, as they sat on the dock watching the sunset, the same dock where he and Lila had begun processing their new reality 2 years earlier, Nolan reflected on the journey from betrayal to recovery. The Donovan conspiracy had taken much from him. His father, years of his life, his ability to trust freely, but had also given him purpose, resilience, and a platform to help others. Most importantly, it had shown him his own capacity for strength in adversity. Penny for your thoughts, Alexandra said, interrupting his reflection. I was thinking about transformation, he replied. How sometimes the worst things that happen to us create space for better things to emerge. Like your foundation from your father's case. Exactly. And like Lila's advocacy growing from her experience. Alexandra considered this. There's a legal principle, fruit of the poisonous tree. Evidence obtained illegally can't be used in court. But in life, sometimes the poison itself becomes the antidote. Poetic for a prosecutor, Nolan teased gently. We contain multitudes, she replied with a smile. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the lake in deepening shades of purple and gold, Nolan felt the last tendrils of bitterness loosening their grip. The betrayal would always be part of his story, but it was no longer the defining chapter. The man who had orchestrated a ruthless dismantling of the Donovan Empire, who had refused to forgive, who had pursued justice with single-minded determination, remained. But alongside him now existed the man who could imagine a future beyond revenge, who could build rather than merely destroy. Melissa had once asked if he thought any of it had been real. Sitting beside Alexandra, watching darkness settle over the lake while inside the house, Lila chatted animatedly with Caleb and Beverly about her college plans. Nolan finally had his answer. What mattered wasn't what had been real then, but what was real now. Not the family destroyed, but the family recreated. Not the trust betrayed, but the trust carefully, deliberately rebuilt. Not the past,